Good morning, Lori.
Hey, Elaine, it's so good to see you today.
It's so good to see your face too. How are you feeling this morning?
I love that you add the qualifier this morning because I think that question means something different to us, right? I am feeling excited to be here with you. You are a friendly and familiar face that I haven't seen in a little while. And I care passionately about talking about how we lead during not one pandemic, but two, and hope that I can show up and share a little of what I know.
Well, I'm really excited to hear all of the things that you've prepared to discuss with us. I want to back up a moment and just welcome everyone to 10 Minutes with 52 and say that my name is Elaine Sheh. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here. Today we have Lori Eberly, who is the founder of Radius. She and I had spoken a few weeks ago. I don't know, time is a relative thing.
Right.
Initially, this conversation was going to be pandemic leadership. And since then, something even more terrifying and more terrible has occurred. And so we've kind of pivoted this conversation to talk about leadership and racism and how we show up as people and how leaders need to show up at this time. So I want to give Lori the full amount of time to talk about all of the things that she's got on her mind and, hoping that we can all take away something from today that we can, either bring back to our leadership teams or enact on our own or just more to think about. So thank you so much, Lori, for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you for that context. Context certainly matters. And good morning to the 52 community. And I want to acknowledge that the email, Elaine, that you and I had corresponded last was May 18th, and that was when we discussed using this 10-minute to talk about pandemic leadership as it relates to COVID. And any of us who are leaders, and I don't just mean by what your title is or what's on your business card or what your pay grade is, I mean all of us who believe in the power of our personal leadership. The notes that I had prepared when we were only talking about COVID was that I wanted to talk about the 3 skills of pandemic leadership, and I identified those as showing up with calm during crisis, providing clarity amid the confusion, and figuring out ways to build connection despite isolation. And while those notes were originally for a COVID discussion, Elaine, I found that they still relate to how we show up while we're also facing the pandemic of police brutality and white supremacy and the exposure of racism in our country. We certainly know that it's not new. And so I want to first talk about that first one, calm during crisis. And that, to me, calm does not equal silent. And that one way that we begin to feel calm in our bodies so that we can show up and spread calm among other places is that we have got to practice naming both our emotions and our visceral feelings. So what do I mean by that? Emotions we might be feeling right now could include rage, sadness, overwhelm, loss, fear, anxiety, agitation. Those are emotions that a lot of us are experiencing. And to go deeper and to add how we're feeling that in our body. And I find, Elaine, that this is not something that most of us practice because we've not really learned in white culture anyway, to pay much attention to the wisdom of our body. And so I just invite folks, as you're listening and as you're maybe thinking about, what am I feeling? Am I feeling anxiety? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Am I feeling helpless? Can you identify where that lives here? When I feel anxiety, I feel an incredible tightness in my chest. When I am scared to take what is in here or what is in my heart and put it out into the world, either in a conversation or in a LinkedIn post, I will often feel tightness in my throat. Some of us feel that fear in our gut. Sometimes our palms get sweaty. And if we want to show up and be a calm presence, then we need to first know how to do that for ourselves. And I just invite folks to practice this as a daily ongoing skill, and recognizing that to be calm is to regulate our nervous systems. And that I believe that as we take on the work of anti-racism, as we take on the work of addressing fear that's showing up in our homes and our communities, where we're showing up in our virtual workspaces, that our nervous systems are hardwired to pick up on the anxiety and emotions of other people. And even if we're just on a Zoom call, we're still doing that. And I would like to hope that those who are present with me can feel my calm and can feel my confidence and can feel my hope that we can move through this instead of only picking up on my anxiety or fear or paralysis. Does that make sense, Elaine?
Absolutely.
The second thing that I think is really important for leaders when we're showing up during a pandemic is that we can really look to provide some clarity amid the confusion. And when I think of what I need for clarity, the way that I define that is, where does my focus need to be? And how can I be discerning of what I need to do next? And I think a lot of us, well, I'll just speak for myself. There is a lot of noise out there right now. There is noise on my Twitter feed. There is noise on LinkedIn. There is noise if you're watching TV. There is noise every time you go to your grocery store and you got to make sure that you remembered your mask and your bags and you're trying to make sure you not touch everything. Our nervous systems are overloaded, feeling hyper vigilant around constant threat. And we need to acknowledge that, okay? And we're gonna have a hard time making wise decisions and knowing how to even begin to show up as a leader unless we can get really clear about what our values are and what our messages are. And so I challenge us to think about, what do we need to focus on? Where are we listening to experts? I am not an expert in COVID, and I am not an expert in dismantling institutional racism. That is not my expertise. My expertise is in trauma. It is in coaching and leading others. It is in building self-awareness. So that's what I can talk to. The other thing that I think is really required for clarity is learning and knowing that I will never have all of the answers, and embracing that idea of beginner's mind. And what I knew yesterday will help provide clarity for me today, but I have to continue to learn more and have that openness to have that ongoing growth mindset. The third thing about what we need to lead during a pandemic is connection despite isolation. And that's why you hosting these 52 10 minutes with 52 matters, because you are a relationship. You embody the relationship that folks in this community have with 52, and your voice and your face and your presence may be the only connection that some folks have. And so I want to look at I want you to ask yourself, how are you fostering trust and belonging? It's a big question. I'll say it again, you can write it down. How are you fostering trust and belonging? How are you doing that at home? How are you doing that in your friendships? How are you doing that with your children? How are you doing that on a scheduled Zoom call? How are you representing that for the business that you own or the team that you lead in your neighborhood? There's so many ways we can look at how are we fostering trust and belonging. Then the other question I want us to ask ourselves is, how are you creating psychological safety? And if I don't feel safe, there is no way I can help you to feel safe, Elaine. And so I need to know, I need to take regular stock. Lori, what are you feeling afraid of today? Lori, what are the threats that are out there that you're worried about? I'm worried that my son has had a fever, and fevers mean different things these days. I'm worried that my mother has had an achiness that hasn't gone away for a week. I'm worried about Black lives. I'm worried about the safety of protesters. I'm feeling threatened that I'm not doing enough, and that feeling helpless is not that useful to the cause, right? So to be able to look at where I'm not feeling safe, so I can name that out loud, maybe I write that down, and then I can be like, okay, how can I check in with Elaine or with the people that are in my sphere of influence today and ask how they're feeling? Do they feel safe in this moment? Is so important to do. And then the final thing I'll say about how we create safety is, while our nervous systems want safety, if we are going to grow and commit to an anti-racist practice, we have to be willing to let go of our safety. And I want to ask all of us, how are we leaning into our discomfort and fear that is required to acknowledge our internalized racism and institutionalized racism? That I need to feel safe enough to do the work, but I cannot expect to stay in that safe zone. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And then we're at time. I want to just put this out there for all of us leaning into doing the work, whether the work means leading our teams during COVID and all of the threats that come with that, or whether it means how do I show up and be bolder and take more risks as I work to becoming an anti-racist. And I want to say this. Number one, mistakes are guaranteed. You will get it wrong. Don't let your fear of perfectionism get in the way. Learn to say you're sorry and own it and move on. Number two, it's okay to ask for help. It is a white supremacy trait that says we have to do this on our own. You are not allowed to ask for help. It shows weakness. And so can we begin to model what interdependence looks like? And third, that two of my favorite leadership qualities that I invite all of us to embrace right now are humility and curiosity. And if you can figure out how to tend your humility, know that you're going to be wrong, and stay curious instead of judgmental, we're going to all do better in this world.
Thank you so much, Lori. I mean, all of the questions you pose are so thought-provoking. I'm still processing them myself, because you raised some really valid points, right? I think we need to look in ourselves and start to make change within ourselves, with the people around us, our community of influence, our sphere of our network of family and friends and colleagues. For those companies that may be, or people or organizations that may need a facilitator to kind of support them in making these changes, is that something that you can help people with companies with? Is that something that you're open to providing support on?
Thank you for the question, Elaine. I do a much better job at helping leaders look at how their own fuckery shows up at a personal level. And by fuckery, I mean habits that damage trust. And one of our habits is not acknowledging our racism. I think if we want to look at institutionally, how can we help to examine racism within our structures, within our policies? I work with some great partners in the Portland community who do that better than me, and some of them have already spoke here. I have great faith in Katie Augsburger and Future Work Design. I have great faith in Daisha and her company Tusk Consulting. I have great faith in Tia Coachman and her consulting organization. And I must say thank you to my teacher, Rebecca Greenidge, who's part of JORE Consulting, J-O-R-E. And I think if you contact any of those women and say, we need more help in our organizations so that we can invest both the time and the resources in unlearning the lies we've been fed, I would amplify those women. And if folks want to take a look at personally how their fuckery shows up and gets in the way of their leading, those calls I would be happy to take. And I just want to really make sure that that you and I, that we're amplifying the voices of Black men and women doing this work, and that I am by no means an equity specialist.
Thank you. And thank you for your transparency. I really appreciate your time today. And I just want to thank everyone that joined us for this wonderful 10 minutes with 52. Lori, please take care of yourself. Thank you again for your time and for your thoughts. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Elaine, and you too.
Thanks, Lori.